You guys all see?
We're good to go.
All right, great. Well, hi everybody, I am Melissa. So yeah, I came from a industrial design background, and hopefully for today's presentation, I can give you a little bit insights on how to make prototypes that you could use for testing your designs. Yeah, so to get started, this is me. You can see it on the slide. You can also see my face in the video. So I am currently working as a user experience designer at ExxonMobil, and I focus on the surveillance and optimization fields. I've been here doing UX for a little bit over 2 years, and before starting a UX position, I actually studied human-computer interaction in my master's degree, which is how I was able to transition into UX. And before that, I did a bachelor degree in industrial design, which is where I learned how to make prototypes, made a lot of them. I was really sick of them at one point. And that's also where I learned to appreciate the physical interaction that we encounter every day, and how to make a good design for physical products. So some of you might wonder, why is prototyping a physical product even important for UX designers or for anyone designing digital experiences? Well, in my opinion, as technology progresses, your digital interface are no longer just bounded to a small box on your phone or on your monitor. There could be a lot of unexpected use cases involved, where the physical embodiment of the screen could really affect your experience interacting with the product. So a couple years back, there's a colleague of mine at Exxon who did a project where he had to reimagine how the ExxonMobil gas app would be used in a car dashboard. And for that project, when he did his testing, he actually printed out a real scale, life-size dashboard of an actual car, and just cut out the dashboard and slapped a screen at the back to display his designs. And during his testing, his participants were actually trying to reenact how they would be driving a car, parking it at a gas station. And they did this really interesting behavior where they would pretend that they parked the car and look out of the windshield, trying to look at a pump number. And that was really interesting, because the reason why they were doing that peaking motion is because they wanted to make sure they know what pump they're at before they start using the app, because on the app they ask you, please pick the pump that you'll be using. So that actually revealed a really interesting requirement for the design, which is being able to automatically recognize what pump you are parked at, and being able to display that information on your car dashboard, so that people don't have to, make uncomfortable and trying to peek out of the window. And I just wanted to share this little project that happened, kind of showcase how your physical embodiment of the screen could really affect how someone would be interacting with your design and what they would be expecting from your design. So to get started on creating a product, the first thing, just like any project that we do, is we want to understand what problem are we trying to solve, right? So in this case, I picked a question of how might we reduce the need for operators to conduct on-site surveillance. This is disclaimer, not an actual project that I did at ExxonMobil, but something I was playing around on my own time for this presentation. So I picked this problem because a lot of times when operators are at site, it's not always the safest for them to travel to the actual field where all the wells are. And sometimes we just don't have enough manpower to go to all the different sites that we have. So is there a way for us to reduce the need to have so much manpower, or just reduce the risk factor involved with looking after a well field. So I thought, maybe a drone would be a pretty good solution. And typically when you have a drone, you probably have some sort of handheld device that's a controller that have some sort of monitor on top where you can monitor how you are doing with the drone. So that was kind of what I was trying to design. So now I have defined the problem and my potential solution. I also want to think about what's the fidelity in which I make my physical prototype in. In order to do that, I wanted to know exactly what I want to achieve with this prototype. So in my case, because I've never used a drone, I don't actually know how it works and what people do with a handheld controller. So I wanted to understand, what are the different use scenarios involved and understand the scale of things. So how big will my actual screen be and how big will my font look like on the screen? So just like in UX design or any digital experience design, there's a wide category of prototype fidelities that you can choose from. So on the lower fidelity side, you can make something like small scale, and it's just there to look at the proportion, have an overview of the overall form of the product, but it's a miniature scale, so it's not really accurate. And then you could also be making something that you're purely making for exploration purposes. It's going to be something in full scale so you can explore the overall form of your final product. You could also be making something that mimics the tactile feedback you might get when interacting with the physical product. So if it's a controller, you probably want to make sure the buttons can actually be pressed and has the right resistance when you're pressing the button. And on the very high fidelity end, you can make something called a functional prototype, which is a prototype that does all the magic tricks that your final product needs to do, but it doesn't actually look like your actual product. It just have to do all the things that the final product needs to do. And then on the flip side, you have something called a appearance prototype, which is something that looks just like your final product. It has the right color. It looks like it has the right material, right finish. It's accurate to size, but it doesn't actually do any of the job it's supposed to do. So my purpose for the prototype was just to understand the scale of things and how one might be interacting with the controller. So I wanted to do something that's quick and dirty that can help me explore the form. So the first thing you have to think about is the material that you'll be using for making a prototype. So again, there's a wide variety of options available out there. Some are really good for making low fidelity prototypes. Some's really good for fidelity prototypes. So things like foam, chipboard, cardboard, foam core, those are really good if you want to make something that's quick and low fidelity. They're easy to manipulate. You just need some sort of cutting tool that you could use. And then on the higher end, things like 3D printing is getting a lot of attention right now because of its accuracy, right? But it does have a higher bar of entry where you have to be able to CAD, make some sort of model digitally in order to do 3D printing. But there's also more traditional materials that you can use, things like clay and sculpting block, which is just a denser foam that you could use. They're really good for creating nice, neat pre-cuts and shapes. And then clay is something that's actually really popularly used in the car industry, where they will actually build a car, an actual size car out of clay, and they paint the clay so it looks like the actual car, and it could be used for presentation purposes before they actually build the whole thing. So it's a really interesting material to use, but then again, you probably need to be pretty skilled at clay and the material works in order to do something that's high-end looking. So for my purpose, I wanted something quick, dirty. I don't need it to be really presentable in any form or fashion. So I went ahead with foam and a corrugated cardboard, which also I happen to have a lot in my house laying around because I do a lot of online shopping. So decided to reuse the materials I had already. All right, so the fourth step is something that I highly recommend you do, which is to make templates for yourself before you start cutting anything. So what I did is I just went to Illustrator, drew, the actual controller in the exact vision that I had with the exact scale that I wanted to be, so it would be totally accurate. And I broke all those different parts of the controller into different and have individual silhouettes for those. And all I need to do is print those out, stick it on a piece of cardboard, and then I can use the template as a guide when I'm making my cuts, so I don't have to feel stressed or worry about, like, am I making the right cut? Am I, cutting at the right angle? Am I taking off too much material than expected? So I have done all that calculation and planning ahead of time. All right, the last step is just to cut and assemble your pieces. So when it comes to cutting, I had a box cutter, a saw, X-Acto knife, and a piece of sandpaper. But then again, it's not something that you have to use if you don't have those or you're not comfortable with those. Generally, I would recommend you have 3 types of tools with you when you're making prototype. First, you want to have something that you could use to remove large chunks of material. Then you want to have something that you could use to refine any details. So that's why I had, the box cutter and the X-Acto, and the saw is just for cutting out big chunks of foam out. And lastly, if you want to produce something that's cleaner looking, that's more presentable, you probably want something that you could use to smooth out any surfaces. That way, just to make sure you are not any imperfections when you're making your prototypes. But then again, what you choose to use as your tools really depends on what you're comfortable with and how much you want to invest into physical prototyping. I had all those materials laying around in my house, so that's just what I used. All right, I also have some tips for you when you're making your prototypes. These are some of the tips I learned after 4 years of schoolwork and making prototypes. The first tip is to always have sharp blades when you're cutting things. You can see on the slides here. So on the left is something that cut with a dull blade, and on the right is something cut with a sharp blade. And you can see that the cut on the right is much straighter, and it's much cleaner. I'm not taking extra material off unintentionally, whereas on the left, the lines are a little crooked, and I have intentional cuts on the material as well. And if you try to use a dull blade to cut cardboard, you're gonna hurt your hand in the end because you're gonna take 4 or 5 cuts before you can actually cut through. So invest a little bit of money, change your blades frequent so you're always using something that's sharp. And then you also want to have tape around you at all times. Tape is really great because you can temporarily hold things together when you're trying to make decisions on whether or not these pieces look good together, and you can temporarily hold them together while you're measuring things, right? Also, when you're sending your pieces, you can tape it around the surface and use that as a guide, because when we sand with hand, our hands don't apply pressure evenly. So you're gonna end up having uneven surfaces if you sand by hand, and you wanna have something that you can reference to that is accurate, that can tell you whether or not you need to, apply a little bit more pressure in one part of the surface. All right, the third tip is be mindful of your material thickness. This is something that a lot of beginners would forget. What I mean by that is, if you can see my video for a second, I have 2 pieces of cardboard in my hand, and if I want to join them together in a right angle, I can do this, which, could look pretty nice, but I'm adding that extra thickness of the material on top of my overall product. So it's gonna end up being larger than what I wanted. And my pieces might not fit together because I didn't accommodate for that extra material. So what you want to do in case of a cardboard, what you could do is you make a cut on one side of the material and strip out the extra unnecessary piece of paper and all the corrugation in between. So now you're just left with one thin layer of paper, and when you join your pieces together, you'll be nicely fitted together without adding, too much extra onto your final product. All right, and last tip that I have for you is, wait till the end to glue your pieces together, because when you're prototyping, you want to be able to reuse a lot of what you have already created, right? So if you glue your good piece and bad piece together from the beginning, then you can't really break them apart and reuse the good piece that you want. So always wait till the end to glue your stuff together. You could use, tape, double-sided tape. I use rubber bands a lot when I'm trying to hold flat things together. So find clever ways where you can temporarily hold your stuff together so you can reuse components that you want. So lastly, this is what I end up creating as a prototype. I also have it in my hand here, where hope you guys can see it in the video. And what this allows me to do is I can actually take this out, right? I'll cut out, print out my fake screen, slap it on. I can take this out to the field and I hold it like an actual user and hold it to the distance where I'm comfortable. And I can see, oh, is this gonna be, screen fonts are gonna be big enough? Do I have enough color contrast on my actual screen with, the sunlight that I'm getting? I could also see, like, if I'm using the controller, are my fingers gonna be in the way of the screen? So if it does, then maybe I should remember that I don't put anything important or critical or around the area where my finger is gonna be blocking it. All right, so that's really all I have for you today. So just to recap, if you want to make a prototype, you want to be able to first know the problem that you're trying to solve. You want to know what your goal is with making a prototype and pick the right fidelity. Don't overdo it. Also pick the right material for the fidelity that you want. Some material is going to take longer to practice, some is easier. You also want to make templates, so you can do all the planning ahead of time, and you're ready to cut and assemble and get was testing. All right, so that's all for you today. I would like to answer if you have any comments. I would love to hear them as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I love your final product.
Thank you. I can't believe it still holds together after like 3 months, because I use a lot of tape, which is not perfect.
If anybody has any questions, please come off mute and ask. We really would love for this to be a discussion. I'll kick it off with one question. I know that in digital design, sometimes stakeholders want higher fidelity in prototypes than is necessary for what you're trying to uncover.
Right.
Has that happened to you before with physical prototypes, and how do you try to make the case for the right level of fidelity that you need?
Right. I think, yeah, that's a really great question. Because, yeah, generally, if you make a higher fidelity prototype, your stakeholder is probably going to love it more because it looks nicer, it looks more like the real product. But what I found very helpful is if I can kind of tear apart my prototype while I'm demoing to someone so they understand why is it looking like this, looking like crap right now. So they understand like, this prototype is not permanent. You can actually change it. It's easy to change it. So feel free to, speak up if you don't have, if you have any, concerns about it or anything you want to change. That's something that I found helpful is kind of demoing to them a little bit, like how you would be able to change the prototype on the spot and really get that message across. Like, I'm not going to spend a lot of money on something that I will be only using once and probably going to change later. Yeah.
That's such a good point too, to say like, we're not married to this design. Look, you can shift.
Right.
Great.
And sometimes it's also helpful if you just let them know how much time it takes to create something nice. Physical prototypes, I think prototypes in general, if you want to make something that's high fidelity, it's going to take a lot longer. If you explain to them, like if I create this controller and make it actually represent the final product with the right color and texture, it's going to take me 5 days because I have to paint the material, wait for it to set, add another coating on it. It's going to add up the time, and they should understand that they don't want to spend the time and money on it.
Yeah. That's great.
I got a question.
Yeah.
So, you made that prototype using the styrofoam and the cardboard. Do you then build, you kind of get to the iteration that you like? Do you then build it on the next level of fidelity, like using the clay and then the 3D printing? Or is it just kind of, you make one and then you kind of go into production with it?
It really depends on, I guess, what you want to communicate and what your stakeholders are looking for. Like if they want you to design the final material, which designers could be, if you're trained as an industrial designer, they teach you like the different materials and its benefits and how it's produced and all that. So it really depends on what your stakeholders looking for and what you're trying to communicate. If you're trying to communicate the final look of it and the texture of it, you might want to end up using 3D printing or clay to make something that's more high fidelity. But if all you're trying to do is get the form across, and there's other engineers who's out there who take care of all the material and all that jazz, then you don't really need to make something that's high fidelity. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
Great, you're welcome. And I guess just to add on that, you could make higher fidelity prototypes with cardboard and the right foam. Foam is a little tricky because if you spray paint it, it's gonna melt the foam. So it's bad. You probably want to use something like a sculpting foam, which is much denser and is paint resistant. So that would be like a material to use, or you want to apply a lot of extra coating on your foam before you spray paint it so you don't, accidentally destroy your baby.
I think you probably just answered my next question, which was going to be, have you ever had any Pinterest fails basically in this process of like having to salvage something that didn't go right?
Oh yeah, a lot, a lot of those. Yeah, I also messed up with hot glue gun before too, because it's gonna also melt your foam, and I did something I shouldn't be doing.
Melissa, thanks so much for the presentation. This was super interesting. I was curious about the process a little bit. So I know you mentioned that, you have all these like tools and you're gluing stuff together. Do you ever run into challenges when you're trying to make a prototype with a fellow designer? Just in terms of like lugging around your materials or building it in your house versus in the office. I'm just curious about that dynamic when it's not just you building
Right.
it.
Yeah. I think when you're working in general, when you're building a prototype, I don't recommend do it in your house, especially if you're gonna be painting anything, you're gonna be using foam. It's a lot of toxic chemicals flying around. So usually when you are making prototype, you want to have a special dedicated lab. If you're messing around with paint and foam, which when you're sending foam, there's a lot of small particles. You want to wear a mask and all that. So for safety reasons, I recommend you go to a shop or a dedicated office somewhere that nobody is using in your company to do that. And I think when working with a fellow designer, the biggest challenge would probably be, I think just like when we were doing UX design, it's two brains. You're gonna have more creative ideas with two brains, but you're also gonna clash and disagree with each other. So there's a lot of back and forth arguments, or you kind of trying to persuade the other end on how to make a decision on the final product. I mean that, and I guess the prototype helps with that, because then you can quickly mock something up and be like, hold it yourself. Tell me if it looks good or not. Tell me if it feels good or not. Like, with digital, do you think it's actually going to be the right experience for users?
Thank you. Yeah, it makes sense that there's just some of the same problems.
Right.
Digital interfaces, but awesome. Thanks for answering that.
No problem.
Hi, my apologies. There's noise behind me, but I wanted to ask a question as well for UX designers who are in the Houston area. Where do you go to get your supplies to create the actual prototype?
That's a really good question. I used to go to Blick art store a lot. I haven't been to one in Houston. I don't even know if there's one in Houston. I don't know. But you can also go to stores like Michael's or any art and craft stores. They generally have the material that you want. Amazon also works. I actually bought a piece of sculpting block a couple weeks ago, and I just went to Amazon. That was easy, quick. I didn't have to wander around in any stores. And also Home Depot. Home Depot is a place I visited a lot. Back in the day, you could get really great paint. You could get a lot of cheap foam out there. You could get cardboard boxes that out there too. That's a really great place to go, and you could get all your tools needed in Home Depot as well. So that's a really great place to visit.
Do you have a favorite prototype that you've made over the years?
Favorite prototype?
Thank you.
I think let me go back to the slides a little bit. So there's so at the bottom there's a functional prototype image that's cut off, but it's actually supposed to be a basket, a shopping basket. And I think of those, sorry, give me a second, let me close my door. So this basket is probably is one of the worst fails for me when I'm prototyping, because it was supposed to be functional and it kind of was, but I wasn't really being smart about it. I was trying to make everything by hand, which, I probably shouldn't have done that. I should probably go out and buy an actual basket to build on top of it rather than trying to build a basket myself. And also, like, there's a lot of other things like I had to do, like I was trying to glue some wheels to the legs of the basket. It was supposed to be like this tall standing thing that could roll around. And I decided to glue it together because I was like, that's probably strong enough. But then I realized I probably should weld in the pieces together so it's actually stable, and can hold more weight to it. So it was something that I actually learned a lot and taught me to just not cut corners. If you have to weld, you weld. Don't try to fool around with glue, because that sometimes isn't strong enough for things. So yeah, that's probably my favorite prototype. It's not the most successful one, but it taught me a lot in that process.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Are there places that teach welding for for artsy people? Like, I wouldn't even know where to go to learn that.
That is a great question. I don't actually know. I know there's a lot of like independent shops
Yeah.
in Houston. I don't know if they teach any courses. I learned while I was in school because that was like a requirement for everybody.
Yeah.
To be able to handle different materials. But I would say maybe try visiting some of the shops locally and see if they have anything that they teach.
Okay. Jessica has her hand raised. Do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, I was just going to share something that I think someone also shared in the chat box. TXRX, they have quite a few different classes, and you can rent a space there too if you need to help.
Awesome.
It's really cool. I might visit sometime.
I'll have to check that out. You never know when you might need welding skills. I don't know if we have another freeze here like last year. Who knows what skills we'll need to break out.
Very true. Be prepared when you're welding. Make sure you have all the necessary gears.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Kira, you said that you took a sewing class there. That's awesome. I really do need to teach myself how to use my sewing machine. So maybe I'll start with that before graduating to something more powerful.
So I think they just have really great, that class was amazing. The woman was like a professor in costume design at HCC. She was so cool. It was awesome. So I've heard other really great things about the other classes too.
That's amazing. I would need someone very patient. Do we have any other questions before we let Melissa go? I don't have a need to prototype anything physical right now, but I just want to because I think that your controller turned out so cute. It's not a good reason necessarily, but thank you so much for sharing the process with us.
No problem. Yeah. And honestly, I think make whatever you want. It's so much fun, like working with your hands and being able to create and DIY. I do that a lot. So yeah.
Awesome. Well,